Have a French defense, and we have 5 games lined up for this morning. I think we can jump right into it. Thank you all very much for being here. I guess we were interested in taking a look at the French defense from basically Black's side. I haven't been much of a French defense player in my life, but I've seen many different approaches, having been an E4 player. So I'm kind of curious to see, how, what we can kind of find in terms of improvements or at least improvements to the way that people generally play the French. Like, I wanted to play through the main line and sort of see, sort of see the main themes, get the full understanding, and take a look. It's not an opening that I know super well, so I just wanted to take a look, to take a look through it. The mainline French starts with E4, E6, D4, D5, 3 knight C3. There's 5 games for today, random, there should be 5 games and starting off with French theory. Sorry, I'm having a weird thing going on with my. Okay, got it. All right, cool. Yeah, there's a weird thing going on with my Twitch chat. Cool, yeah, so E4, E6, D4, D5, knight C3. The main line, basically, Black has this main decision point. He decides between the French winnower variation and the French main line, classical variation. I think I want to go over. We can go over the winnower another day, and I think we may have already gone over the winnower to some degree in previous streams. So I just want to go to. I want to take a look at the main French main line here. So knight f6 being the third move for Black. Bishop g5, d takes e4, knight takes e4 is a main line. Awesome, cool. Yeah, thank you for sending it, Amet. I added this game. I'll add your game right now, Amet, for May 13th during the 6:05 p.m. Eastern stream. That's tomorrow. Tomorrow night stream. Unless you would prefer, a morning on the following day or something like that. But I'll add it for that right now. Cool. So that's added. Thank you very much for sending it, Ahmed. If anyone else wants to send in more games, we have open slots as early as tomorrow night. We can give, basically a solid game, 15-minute game analysis. Feel free to send them. Could always use more games, could always use more lesson ideas. Thank you very much for sending that, Ahmed. So looking at this game, what are the ideas? Basically, I draw again from this book that I'm always talking about, which is The Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine. But basically, one of the main ideas in the French is to work, with this pawn structure on d4 and e5. If Black can disrupt White's pawn structure on d4, e5, that tends to be favorable or equal for Black. And if White can maintain the pawn structure on d4, e5, that tends to be favorable for White. That isn't always true, and if we play to the end of the French main line, you'll see that there are equalizing lines in which that d4, e5 structure does get disrupted. But in general, that tends to be the case with these openings. So bishop g5 is one line, the main line. E5 is also playable here. Bishop e7. And then there's another, kind of large fork. There's this Richter attack, bishop takes f6, followed by bishop takes f6, e5, and then there's e5, which is the main line. I just want to go over the Richter attack briefly and show sort of what's going on in that opening. E5, knight fd7, bishop takes e7, or queen takes e7. And this is the main line. So basically, there's a few different options for White here. And here, White's choosing between a few different moves. Knight b5 is the line that I was playing for a long time. Knight b5 puts pressure on c7, requires kind of immediate response. On knight b5, the move is knight to b6, and you have this discovered defense on c7. On the other side, you have basically, you basically have f4, which reinforces the center pawn structure. You have queen d2, which, develops the queen. And basically puts it on a dark square so that f4 can be slightly better supported, and also to set up queenside castling for the white king. So here, queen takes, and then a6, and then basically here, Black's gonna kind of keep pushing and making progress. D takes c5 is the main move. I guess I'm sort of reluctant to play d takes c5 from a fundamental standpoint. I feel like d takes c5 leads to a relatively, with d takes c5 basically, you have a voluntary disruption of the d4 e5 center by white. So I lean away from that line based on the fundamental goal to maintain this. That said, yeah, no problem at all, FIFA Boy. Always feel free to watch video on demand. Honestly, my goal is really just to create as much free chess material as possible. It doesn't have to do with it's feel free to watch video on demand or however it's the most comfortable for you. I'm thinking of switching my times around a little bit as well. But thanks for the idea, FIFA Boy, and I really wanted to go over this and try to explain some of the main lines here. But the main concept, that's true in most French lines is the goal of maintaining this d4 e5 structure. With the d4 e5 structure maintained, queen takes. Basically, white has choice between a few different things. Ideas are d takes c5, queen takes c5, bishop d3, standard developing for white. White will probably end up developing queenside, but in this case, it's a little bit more tricky. The queen does have some pressure on the queenside here, but at the same time, this long diagonal. Hey, thank you very much for being here, Chiku. How are you doing? So this queen c5 is facing towards the kingside diagonal, and overall this looks good for black. Good for black, relatively close to equal. This is pressure being exerted on the on the various flanks. I'm good, Chiku. Thank you very much for asking. So this is but this is generally good. Things like b5, b4, and just overall, the pressure on the king side is going to be something that black will have to work with for the rest of the game. Black will probably castle king side, and it'll be a complicated positional game. The main lines obviously aren't fully determined, so it's not like I can lean towards one side or the other really. Basically, I know that it's a game that exits opening theory at around this time. So if instead white wants to maintain the pawn, or white wants to maintain the d4 pawn structure for a little longer, he can castle queen side here, and then on this black will start expanding on the queen side as well. b5, d takes c5, queen takes c5, bishop d3, b4, and now basically this pressure is on the white king or white queen side is pretty substantial. The eval has shifted towards black here, and I think black has a kind of pre-made plan, pre-made attack, and comfortable way of going into the end game, or into the late middle game. Sorry. But yeah, this attack should provide at least a plan, a general focus for black to do going forward. Anyways, moving on here. I wanted to take a look at a few other lines. I wanted to look. So that was the main line. We'll probably circle back to the main line, but I wanted to just take a look at this. The Richter attack: bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, e5. This tends to be good for black on average. Black may have attacking chances. He can try to disrupt this pawn structure with f6, castle kingside, and try to potentially attack f2. It's an interesting line. Queen g4 is played early into castling, f5, and then white is attacking, but black has successfully undermined the center and has the ability to continue to undermine the center with moves like f6. In this particular line, white is playing queen h3, but he'll probably play bishop e2 and g4, I think, soon, to try to basically recapture some of the center play. Anyways, looking more of this, interesting generally. There's a lot of different lines. People talk about the Tarrasch line. This ends up being kind of more solid, consistent, small advantage for white. It's less aggressive than the main line, but the knight is developed to a more passive square, but c3 is playable for white. But that's a choice that's made on the white side. But that's the Tarrasch variation. With knight c3, I don't know, knight f6, bishop g5, d takes c4, knight takes, bishop e7. You're in a more simplified position. This is a more open version of the French. It doesn't have the normal d5, e6, e5, d4 structures going on. It's a more open line. Generally, I think this tends to be, reasonably good, just a reasonably good position. White maintains the initiative. Nothing too exciting is going on here. And it becomes basically a more open situation with attacks available, to both sides. Forward-looking plans that are somewhat flexible to both sides and a more open position relative to General French. Thank you very much for the follow, Tapas. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for joining the stream. So yeah, in this position you can play moves like c6, knight d7, knight b6, and overall just sort of advance your development for both white and black in a relatively straightforward way. Bishop d3, castles, this kind of thing. So that's that French line. Going back to the mainline French, which I think is the most important. There's a few different lines here. Queen g4 is kind of an interesting novelty here. With these types of aggressive attacks, white basically starts the action in the middle game early. These can often lead to disruption of white's very important center. This main theme of maintaining the d4 e5 structure. But overall, I think these tend to sort of lean more towards black than just the regular main line. So here, e takes, knight takes, and white center is somewhat neutralized. This queen is a liability basically. It has to go to queen h4 or queen g5. But basically, this center doesn't really pose the same problems for black as the previous center did. With castling and moves like c5, b5, b4, c4, he's going to end up with strong attacks on the queen side relatively quickly. That's assuming that white castles on the queen side, which he's already pretty well set up to do. So, pretty interesting. Continuing on this, more main lines. We looked at the knight. Let's take a look at the knight b5 line. The knight b5 line that's discovered knight b6, c3, a6, and then the knight gets ejected to a3, c5. Overall, good basically good for black. This knight is somewhat dislocated. It's relatively equal position. White has lost the initiative. Knight c6, bishop d7, and basically just general pressure, solid positions, and castling kingside. But yeah, very interesting situation. Black can sort of continue on with basic development, and another playable game out of the mainline French. Just so I know what this is called, I guess is this called the Alpin variation? This knight b5, yeah, knight b5 French Alpin variation. I don't know the name super well, to be completely honest. I learn a lot of them off of chess.com. It's this kind of thing I would recognize, but I don't know the names extremely well. Anyways, looking more at this, basically black has some options here. This is the main line f4. a6 is main line for black. a6 is interesting. I always feel like the knight b4, the knight b5 threat on c7 can be dealt with pretty easily by knight to b6. So I sort of wonder about a6. A6 is the main line, but I don't know how good it is necessarily. It just doesn't feel like the most productive move for black. I sort of like c5 here. Castles make sense. But let's take a look at these. Castles, knight f3, c5, queen d2, knight c6. And basically black's placing a lot of pressure on the center. Overall, this looks pretty good for black. Pawn takes here is an idea. On pawn takes c5, white's voluntarily kind of removed his center. But yeah, these lines were basically you're playing into a voluntary pawn takes c5 main line for black against the French. This basically sort of implies a movement towards equality. White still might have better piece play here. Black's bishop development's kind of weak, and he's going to need to attack aggressively on the queen side in order to create enough mobility for his pieces. But overall, I think moves like d4 should be helpful. Knight b6, knight c4. It seems like a good path forward for black, and overall a general, basically a position where white has still has the initiative, but black is starting to make inroads with the center being depleted. This is just scratching the surface of French defense, but you guys can keep requesting it, and I'll keep doing it. So thank you guys very much for coming up with the idea. I really appreciate it. Yeah, please keep the ideas coming. These types of things are very interesting. I get to learn a lot, and this is, those were some of the main lines out of the mainline French. Cool. Thank you very much for the idea. Please send more ideas. Please send more suggestions for games, and we'll go from there. Cool. So on the next one, this is another game where it's Mr. Gimmick's game. We're basically going into our game analysis section. So this is E4, C6, Caro-Kann, D4, D5, and this is the Caro-Kann advanced variation. Mainline Caro-Kann is knight C3. I generally think this is better. Basically with E5 you're playing a second rook or a second king pawn move. Hey Tarash, welcome to the stream. Thank you for being here. So here I would say knight C3 is probably not the right knight C3 is probably the right concept. E5 is sort of a secondary move here. So let's say E5, bishop F5, knight F3, E6, and now we're in the mainline Caro-Kann. It's got kind of a this pawn structure is common to a lot of openings. It can happen in it can happen in the French. It can happen in the semi-Slav. But basically, this is a solid pawn structure for black. I mean, everything's supported. The F7 pawn is vulnerable. The B7 pawn is somewhat vulnerable, and basically, there ends up being there basically end up being opportunities, for black to prevent white from getting into either B7 or F7. This tends to be a strong pawn structure. One of the main liabilities in the French, and one of the main reasons why this pawn structure can be more problematic in the French, is because this bishop gets stuck on C8 in the French. But yeah, it's pretty solid for black. I mean, there's just not really a lot of vulnerability here. In terms of moving this forward, do you do bishop E2, knight D7, whatever it takes basically to continue to move this forward. Mainline is bishop E2. We can play out a few more kind of mainline moves: bishop E2, knight D7, castles, knight E7. But basically just a relatively restricted development for black, but a strong pawn structure. So basically spatial disadvantage and center disadvantage for black, but a strong pawn structure that supports itself and the ability to develop in a reasonably healthy way. Going on this, C5 is what was played here. Where should you develop your G8 knight in that line? Good question. I guess I would say I would try to probably undermine the center. Like, I would probably play F6 and then pawn takes E5 if you can. Then follow that up with knight G6. But yeah, you have sort of switched this problematic C8 bishop for this somewhat problematic knight. There's also lines in which you develop to F5. I mean, we can keep going on. Let's just play through this this theory. In this case, I think it's probably going to be... Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Lord. I appreciate it. So rook C1, rook D8. But we can see how this... I'm just kind of playing out. In this particular game, how is this problem resolved? Basically, this knight stays relatively immobile on E7. It supports this knight on bishop on F5. It does have the possibility of getting posted on F5 later in the game, but this one, just for example, the knight stays on E7 with opportunities to go to G6 and F5 as tactics allow. But yeah, interesting. Interesting question, Tarash. I'm just looking. Yeah, I mean, maybe. These lines are probably, these lines are similar. So if someone got comfortable with playing those lines, they might have thematic concepts that are similar to all those openings. But yeah, this is the C5 move. C5 is the second most common here. And here, basically, C5, D takes C5, knight C6. C5, I fundamentally, I know it's a main line, but this is another one where I'm like, well, isn't it kind of inefficient to move the C pawn twice in the same opening? But the response to that is, well, I guess it was inefficient for white to play his E pawn forward twice in the same opening. So, C5 is a playable game. even though fundamentally it seems to differ from general, general fundamental opening theory. But yeah, so d takes c5 here, knight c6, bishop b5, e6, bishop e3, knight e7, and basically, black is just kind of developing. The position's somewhat closed. White is making an effort to defend this this c5 pawn, and this is basically the d takes c5 line in the advanced Caro-Kann. So yeah, let's go back to the game. c3, knight c6, and basically here, yeah, no, modern theory, I mean, but yes, I guess that's true, Tarash, but at the same time, I'm sort of like, I'm not a huge fan of modern theory, basically. I know modern theory can work, and I know it can be effective, but modern theory involves giving your opponent advantages in space and development, and I'm always cynical when it comes to that. But yeah, overall here, this is interesting. This c takes d5 too. I have some questions about. I think basically c takes d5 is not what I would play. I'd probably play bishop g4 or potentially bishop f5. This c takes d5, kind of diminishes white's center. The e5 pawn becomes a lot more vulnerable. There might be opportunities to hold on to the c5 pawn, but again, this seems, this is going to transpose into something that looks somewhat like the French, and d takes c5 is generally not a good move this early in the French opening. Anyways, c takes d4. Pawn structure is fine. I mean, basically because you had this solid triangle pawn structure, now you have this one. This is good. And yeah, pushing this forward, I guess... Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Charash. And I think basically with that concept, white is able to, white is basically able to get a little bit more. He potentially secures an outpost on d4, but I'm also generally not convinced about the strength of d takes c5 in the French. But grandmasters know better, so I would always defer to them. But yeah, let's go back to this main game line. This is basically we're in the game's main line here. Black is looking fine. The shift basically is right around here. This game's already been annotated, so it's basically minus plus at that point. But yeah, I think the shift really happens. I don't know. I mean, bishop e2 is a little bit passive, but certainly after the, again, relatively passive a3, white's getting some chances at the d4 pawn that are not easily dealt with. Basically, knight e7, the dark squared bishop has some problems, and in terms of formulating a plan for black, it's a tough question. I sort of am tempted to play a move like bishop f5. The engine is suggesting knight e7. That's probably the most straightforward developing move. But in terms of setting up a plan, I think the rook should move to the c8 file. The king should get castled. The pieces should all get developed, probably knight to g6 and bishop to e7. Yeah, that's an idea. I guess I'm thinking of something a little bit more tactical than that. But yeah, there's some there's definitely some truth to that. One of the things that's characteristic of the French is basically black's dark squared bishop ends up being much stronger than its light squared bishop. That's sort of a general theme. That's because these pawns, d4 and e5, which are often fixed in the center, are placed on dark squares. And also pawns defending this pawn structure, like c3 or f4, are also on dark squares. So black's dark squared bishop gets extra play later in French lines, and that's what Tarash is referring to. But yeah, knight h6, knight f5, and basically, black has won a pawn. This attack on d4 got mobilized very quickly. No, that's a good idea. No, that makes a lot of sense too, Tarash. No, I think that's probably a very sound plan. Probably a very fundamentally supported plan. But yeah, it's helpful for you to bring it up, because I do think that it's important to note that that this d4 e5 structure leads to strength of the black bishop in the French. So yeah, queen f5, and basically black's looking a good amount better. This, black's basically up a pawn because the d4 pawn got lost, and in this game, black did some good maneuvering in order to win that d4 pawn. He played knight h6, knight f5, and then knight takes d4. And then basically this is, this is good for black generally. Pawn on e4 probably should be defended. White does this with rook e1. But I'm overall liking black's position. Considering the black sent this game in, he's played a pretty good game and sent in a pretty good game. This isn't my favorite opening, but that's a matter of taste. And then you win the d4 pawn, which is good. This is all really solid. And I guess maybe there's some inefficiencies here we should take a look at. All right, so let's look at this position. Black is up. In terms of plans, placing pressure on the e5 square is good. Putting a rook on c8 is good. I don't think there's much vulnerability on the king side. I mean, black will have to be careful about weaknesses on the dark square on the king side, but I think it would take a really long time to really get in there for white. So, yeah, I would just move rook c8 here. And then you've got kind of an interesting position. I mean, you're really pretty significantly. Like, having that extra d pawn is really, was really a good tactical win and a big error for white. So you're carrying this one d4 pawn as long as you can in this game. I don't know if bishop plays f4 here or queen plays e2. Okay, yeah. So I don't know. In this position, what would I do? I mean, longer term plans, I would definitely want to trade off one of my knights for this bishop. I mean, this position's very quickly becoming more open. I might do this using like knight a5, rook c1, knight b6. I mean, basically just, maneuvering the knight into the white king side, or white queen side, white territory until you have an opportunity to trade off the knight for a bishop. But I sort of wonder, do you have a tactical win of e5 here? Oh, no, you don't. No. I was looking for a second at e5, queen takes e5, queen takes d3, but then you have queen g7, so that's not playable. Maybe queen h4. There's a few different opportunities for black here. Queen h4 threatens the bishop and takes the bishop out of black king side territory. It basically ends all threats for white along the king side. Yeah. Yeah, just looking at your question or your statement, Tarash. Yeah, that's right. I mean, this white squared bishop isn't really doing much. It's not being super utilized here. So I still think it's worth trading off the knight for the light squared bishop in general. But yeah, it's not as if the bishop is particularly well placed. Bishop f8. Basically simplifies the game. The engine is, screaming equality after this. It does make knight takes e5 a playable tactic, although now white has fixed that problem. Probably play queen h4 and then play like knight d4. Overall, this position's solid. Black has a game to play here. The rook's on the c8 file, and really, black should just be in the process of kind of being careful and trading down and trying to win this game in the endgame. It should be an endgame win. White does have a strong bishop in the endgame, considering that. Hey, good morning, Ansh. Thank you for joining the stream. Welcome. But yeah, basically black. Gotcha. I understand, Tarash. Yeah. No, sorry. You're right. Yes, I could read. I'm gonna run through this, but earlier in the game for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I would say rook a d1, and then black should aim to basically trade things off. Queen h4 looks interesting. Knight takes e5 looks interesting, but basically, you know, white doesn't really have much organization here, and black can try to make maneuvering, maneuvering ideas to trade things off. Queen f4 makes sense. Queen a4 makes sense. This looks okay. I'd probably play king g8 and knight f5 here. Yep, knight f5. And overall, it does seem like this is, basically, black. I think when this pawn got disconnected, when this turned from a connected pass pawn, which it was here, to a, to an isolated pawn. Maybe pawn takes f5 is an issue here. But overall, I think black's, black's gonna try to carry this advantage into the endgame. I think this is a win. Yeah, I don't really see any problems with this game, to be honest. Maybe there is some inefficiency in trading off the, and basically trading off the early, the bishop. But I don't know. I mean, black basically carried an endgame relatively strongly into the, carried an advantage that he got in the opening by winning the d4 pawn relatively late into the endgame. No, there's true. I mean, yeah, there's definitely some truth to that, Tarash. But yeah, in terms of basically looking at this game, I don't know. I mean, black basically had a lead of about, a point and a half in the beginning, and no real serious errors were made. It was kind of, I guess maybe, I don't know about this idea ultimately, knight f5. It does trade off this bishop, and I guess pawn takes e6 doesn't really have much of a follow-up. Maybe, I don't know, rook takes e6. The engine is saying rook takes e6, rook takes e6, pawn takes, rook takes e6, rook takes e6, queen c2. Okay, king h1, king h3. I just want to play out this line because this is sort of interesting. And then black wins by taking d1. Interesting. Okay, so I guess that was an error for black. This tactic, this is a relatively small error. Black could play a better move by playing rook takes as opposed to pawn takes. Rook takes here, rook takes, queen c8, or sorry, queen c2, and then king h3, queen takes d1, and then on rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes. And then I think this isn't a draw. I assume it's not. I just want to play this out. I mean, at any point here, basically, white is... Wow, that's great. That's great, Chikyu. Yeah, no, I guess I would say, keep at it, basically. Do tactics for an hour or two a day, and your game will improve. There's not really much of, I can't, give too much in terms of guidance. You just really need to do it. You will steadily improve. If it makes you feel better, you can also optimize the things about your computer. You can get a mouse as opposed to a touchpad. You can turn off the animation on chess.com. But yeah. 2 hours a day, you improve. I mean, it's really, there's not really much of a science to it. It's just if you, just basically keep at it, be consistent, and it will help. It's hard to quantify how much, but it will absolutely help, and over time, it will help a lot. So that's my suggestion on there. Keep up the good work, Chikyu. And good tactics definitely support positional play. They do have some positional puzzles. I mean, basically at the highest level of chess, tactical wins to secure positional improvements as opposed to material improvements. So yeah, in general, I would keep I keep at it. It really is the best route forward. So yeah, black's looking pretty solid. And, I think basically not too many errors in this game. There is that one tactical improvement on rook takes e6 as opposed to king g7. But other than that, not much for me to really point to. We could look at inaccuracies, I guess, but these inaccuracies I think are pretty minimal. Most of them are from white. 97, I guess. I mean, I'm really sort of struggling to come up with great inaccuracies here. Overall, I think it was relatively strong positional play. You're basically pushing forward an advantage that you got in the opening, and just trying to trade off as stably and as efficiently as possible. Makes sense. Yep. Cool. Yeah, interesting. Thank you very much for sending the game, Mr. Gimmick. I appreciate it. And we'll keep looking. Interesting. This is Anch's game. Thank you very much for sending the game in, Anch. And we'll take a look. Hey, thank you very much for the subscribe. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for the follow. Cool. D4, D5, Bishop F4. Strong opening for white. We'll take this from black's perspective. Bishop F5, Knight F3, Knight F6, and basically, A6, and this general line. White basically has a strong, White basically has a relatively strong, good developing position, and black is gonna have to find a way to equalize. London system is a very strong opening. It basically ends up leading to solid, consistent advantages for white well into the middle game. So for white, I really like it as an opening. For black, it is challenging to play against. Very sound play. Knight takes. So knight c3 is inaccurate. I mean, white doesn't want to allow knight takes f4 here, really. I think bishop g3 is better. Bishop takes b8 is also listed as the second best move, but basically knight takes f4, trading the knight on f6 for the strong London bishop is something that will favor black. So overall here, I think black's looking fine. This isolated queen's pawn, these doubled pawns here. Overall, this should be good for black. From a general sense. E6, knight d7, bishop e7, castles. This is a good, solid developing plan for black. Really was a kind of an error to trade off that London bishop. Yeah, probably. Yes, I mean, you can definitely reverse engineer some things. I mean, the truth of the matter is, the highest level players have thought processes that are, it's very difficult to explain what someone was looking at for 42 minutes. I mean, that requires a very sophisticated level of thinking. But yeah, that's definitely something you can do. I mean, also, there are many books that exist, Tarash, where, people are looking at high-level games, and the games are, the grandmasters are actually there to explain their thinking. But yeah, you can usually slow a game down enough that you can figure out, why or what the plans and purposeful ideas were. I think that's a pretty good way to study. Yeah, no, I mean that's the way that these things go. I mean, they sound pretty extreme, but at the same time they are pretty extreme. So, yeah, it sounds like I mean, I know they do a lot of calculation at the board. They're calculating, and they're calculating quickly. So, yeah, yeah, that's a good idea. I like that idea, Anch. I can do that. But yeah, basically black is looking reasonably good here. Sorry, I was just kind of spacing through this game. I want to make sure that I really look at this. I think black's in good shape after knight takes f4, but his way of securing, further development is, basically, how does black secure, further development given this this improved pawn structure? Maybe e6. I mean, e6 looks required. D5 causes a lot of problems relating to b5. So I would say, yeah, I would say e6 here over threats on b5. Um, uh, Bishop e6, bishop e6, d5, and there's almost no situation in which d5 doesn't win for white. I mean, black really has to struggle here. So this one is tactical. Basically, I can't remember. I guess this is called like distraction or something. But basically, this pressure on b5 ends up being, pretty significant with bishop e6. So e6 lets black have a more healthy pawn structure. It sets up the development of this bishop, and it strengthens, against attacks on d5, which could become a liability for white. I think this is mostly tactical vision. Seeing that this d5 causes problems on b5 is tactical. So I think with general tactical study, that's probably the best way that you would see this. From a positional perspective, I think black's played fine. I mean, black traded his knight for that London bishop, and that was helpful. Now you play e6, and this basically set of moves leaves, basically e6 leaves black in a relatively good position. So I would say e6 over bishop e6 here. Bishop e6, white didn't play d5 and weakened the b5 square, so now you've got really good positions. Queen takes d4 looks good. F6, well, I don't know. I guess I would play queen takes d4. It seems to be a hanging pawn. So b4, I guess, does put more pressure on white. And I think, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting game, Ange, for sure. It basically turns into a relatively tactical and less strategic game fairly early on. And then, interesting. And I'm wondering, but I'm just going to look at this endgame and see if there's sort of a better method here. You're up a piece. So I guess my main idea in this endgame would be to not trade off pawns if possible. I think bishop e7 provides a pretty solid improvement over g3. These pawns may fall anyways. You may have to trade off both the a pawn and the b pawn here. But this ends up being, way more equal than black would like it. But anyways, yeah, this is you found a good tactic that works. Now the bishop's going to take all the pawns, and black will win comfortably. But I was just wondering, in terms of like, is there a better way? Because you want to make your endgames as easy as possible. So bishop e7 and threats on the queen side pawns here. B3 I think invites the trading more easily than it should. I think with bishop e7 you keep more material on the board, and if you need to exit this strategy by playing b3, that's just fine as well. But yeah, overall I think black's got a good, I think black played a good game, starting with the knight takes f4 move. If you can trade your knight for the London bishop, you should. This all makes sense, and bishop e6 is a tactical error. So on that move I would say e6 and the problems are resolved. It's also just sort of a better move from a mobility perspective. E6 and then bishop to b4. I think basically this is a good idea for black. E6 would be the move that I would play here. Cool. This advances development as opposed to bishop e6. I mean, you need something to play against against this f7 threat. But e6 is a more kind of forward-looking way to do it. Bishop e6 sort of undevelops this bishop and makes this bishop more difficult to develop. So for that reason, e6, since it covers really the same general concepts, you basically can you can play it. I understand there's some tactical stuff here that goes on, like with bishop g4, bishop g6, f5, pawn takes, bishop e5, but you can steer out of it. So overall, I think that this sort of requires, somewhat advanced tactical vision. Actually, a4 comes in as a transposition before bishop g6. But overall, this should look good for black over white. The queen probably has to go to d1, and then after the queen goes to d1, you're in good shape as black. You know, the attack's kind of subsided. So yeah, I think this basically comes down to tactical play. Yeah, rook takes. Everything looks good. You know, you trade into a piece up endgame. I might have tried to hold on to the pawns here a little bit better, but you know, you're a piece up, so this should be a win. But yeah, you know, in terms of corrections to make this game, I think that that e6 versus bishop e6 is the one that I see the most easily. And this queen takes d4 move, or sorry, e6. So e6, or what the game went, bishop e6, queen c2. This queen takes d4 move is playable now. It wasn't playable a move before, like here, queen takes d4, queen takes f7. But this pawn was available to be taken now. You know, queen d1 is the best play for black out of this. Or sorry, d5 is the best play for black. But considering that black doesn't see d5 on queen c2, queen takes d4, you know, equalizes or you know, secures a small advantage for black. This is good. So those are the two moves that I would look at. You know, move you know, move 10 for black and move 11 for black. In these two moves, you know, black moved the bishop backwards and hampered this development. And also this queen d, or this pawn on d4 was hanging on the next move. But yeah, no, thank you very much for sending the game, Ange. Please keep sending them. Super helpful. I appreciate all the help that you provide for this channel, and you know, it's really yeah, no, it's really great. I appreciate you being here for the analysis, and yeah, I think this is a pretty well played game. I mean, you got a piece up out of the opening, and was relatively smooth sailing from there. So so yeah, great game. No, thank you very much for sending it, Ange. I really appreciate it. And it's, yeah, very interesting stuff. Yeah, but those are the two moves I would focus on, 10 and 11. Thank you, Ange. Really appreciate it. Thanks. I'm going to move on to the next one. Next game is King Me as black. And we'll play it from black's perspective. Okay. So white plays the English, black plays g6, and white plays e4. Wow, thanks guys. Road to GM 3000. Thank you very much for the raid. Wow, this is a big record in terms of yeah. Thanks very much all for the follows and the big raid. Thank you. But yeah, so on to the next position. So we have c4, e4, e6, d4, bishop g7, and I think basically black's looking pretty good, you know, in this situation. Thanks, guys. Wow, thanks all for the join and the follows. But yeah, so in this game, you know, white plays the English and black plays an early e6, d4, bishop g7. This is pretty wild. You know, this is a relatively, you know, closed flank opening for black. You know, what does white do in a situation where white plays, you know, white plays aggressive moves in the center and black's developing on, you know, flanks on the king side, queen side? Yeah, no, thank you very much for sending in the game, King Me. And just for anyone new here, this is a channel where I give free lessons for about 3 hours a day. You know, I've created this channel in the last month or two. And yeah, no, thank you all very much for coming and for the raid. And if you guys have any suggestions or ideas, please join my Discord. My Discord server is on a link on the screen. And you can go to the Discord server, suggest a game or suggest a lesson idea, and I will get to it usually within a couple days. It's pretty impressive. I haven't had you know, groups this large join. Thank you very much for the raid. But yeah, overall, yeah, if anyone has any ideas for free lessons, just add them to the game suggestion section of my Discord, and we'll add them to the list. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the raid, and thank you all very much for being here. So yeah, so this is kind of an unusual opening, and e6 is kind of an unusual response. I mean, basically this weakens the this weakens the pawn structure on the on the king side. The dark squares here are relatively weak. G7, H6, F6. This is going to end up being somewhat problematic for black. A better move here is just to fianchetto the bishop immediately. With the fianchetted bishop immediately here, I think you can play something along the lines of like d4, d6, and you can go towards towards of a like more of a modern structure where you're getting early breaks. Thank you all very much for the follows, guys. I really appreciate it, and thank you very much for being here. But yeah, c5 is a standard modern break. But e6 and g6 are generally not paired this way. If you look at the commonest of openings being played, e6 is basically, e6 basically has one option as opposed to, at least more than 1,000 others. So, one of the things that I was doing in the last week is I was taking a look at how to, assess whether opening moves are correct or incorrect. And the method that I was thinking of for doing this is to look at basically two main criteria. Look at the eval before you make a move. Okay, so here you have an eval of plus 0.6, and you have kind of a steered opening line. So you look at the move, and if the eval before the move is played is plus 0.6, and you play it, and then there's a big shift against you, that should be kind of a red flag, a heads up that that's not the way to go. So basically, after black plays e6, the eval shifts from 0.6 to plus 0.12. So the eval shifted, towards white 0.6 after that, after that move. That's a big shift. So that should be red flag number one. Second criteria, if you look at the commonness of the openings being played, like in this, opening book, you see that bishop g7 is by far much more common here. So the combination of those two, e6 being way down the list in terms of popularity, and the shift being heavily against you in terms of eval, the combination of those two factors should be an indication that that move might be worth revision in your repertoire. That's what I would say. There are other ways that you can evaluate opening moves, but since opening preparation and how to improve your opening repertoire was a topic, I think we can use that criteria for looking at different ideas. Bishop g7, f4, knight c6. Knight c6 is also kind of interesting. I mean, we're in a position where there's not really as much opening theory to draw from. Black definitely does need a break. Probably d5, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, c6. I think potentially that could be good for black. Other ideas, knight e7 maybe. But knight c6, knight c6 does cause some problems. c5 is a very common break. c5 is something that can generally help. And c6, d5, that tends to be a a move that tends to be a move order that improves black's ability to challenge in the center. Knight c6 is a little bit, I don't know, restrictive. You definitely want to get development, but the more natural way that you can develop this is d6, knight d7, knight e7 castles. That seems like a good play. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Thank you very much, all guys, for joining. But yeah, so you're looking for ideas here. Knight c6 is one, but black will have to deal with restrictions on his development later. d5 probably, sure. Knight f5, but black is basically equalized here. Black has played a flank opening against basically modern opening against a large center for white, and black needed a break and to hold a break. So if knight e7, c6, pressure on d5, and I think basically this is going to be an idea that's going to be this is an idea that's going to be successful. So knight e7 holds the center, c6 potentially, or bishop to d7. But you're going to end up with a relatively strong center for black, considering the early, the early white spatial and developmental advantage, spatial and center advantage. Knight h4, knight takes f3, and here pawn takes c4 I think is playable, and you'll get a discovered threat on d4. b5 I'd play. Yep, holds that. a6. And, now you basically have sort of a queen, kind of like a Queen's Gambit accepted type structure, but it's later in the game, so you have a better chance of holding it. Bishop b7, pawn takes, maybe something takes rook. But you're going to get pressure from black on the king side, and this is going to basically improve things for black. Queen d5 looks like a natural outpost. It's not super vulnerable to the knight. Queen d5 here, and everything's preserved for black. Black has the spatial advantage, and the ability to kind of push forward this development on the queen side. So queen d5 looks solid, a5 looks solid, and I think that's black's best route forward. Bishop b7 just hangs the pawn on c4. Just a note for anyone who may be new here. This is a viewer game. This is a game sent to this stream by KingMe1993. If you guys have other games that you'd like looked at, or games that you would like a free analysis done on, please just send them to me. You can do it in the chat, or you can do it in the on the official Discord in the game submission section. But if you have any ideas for lessons, or if you have any games of yours that you'd like me to take a look at, I'm very happy to do it completely free. I do the stream 3 hours a day, we'll get to it, based on how much people have been using the stream in the past, within a couple of days. If you'd like a personalized game analysis, thank you very much for joining, Aphelion. Appreciate it. But yeah, basically anybody, if you have games or games that you'd like reviewed, please just send them over on the chat, and I'll add them to my list, and we'll take a look at them. But yeah, bishop takes c4, knight takes, queen takes, and overall this is a tactically strong way for black to play. This situation looks good for black. Potentially a5, potentially c5, the rook moving to d8. Yeah, good point. That is I didn't even think of that. But yeah, you're right, French Bill. Hopefully, yeah. But feel free to send on the Discord. And if any of you guys would like a free game analysis, or you'd like to make a suggestion for any of my upcoming lessons, please just send them on the Discord, and we'll get we'll get to them within a few days. They'll be on the stream. So this is King Me's game. In terms of improvements for this game, King Me, I think you've got, a pretty good, solid game. You're able to trade off early. You're able to get a discovered check on this d4, basically a discovered attack on this d4 pawn, and then you expand effectively on the queen side. So b5, a6, and you've got sort of a queen's gambit accepted structure, b4. And then, your first improvement, really, I think your first oversight is knight a5 holds the pawn structure, but queen d5 also holds the pawn and centralizes the queen, so that the knight can be utilized for the defense of b4. You can play rook b8, you can play rook to d8 potentially, but overall, I think black's going to be pretty solid here. If the c4 pawn is maintained. So yeah, queen d5, and maybe line up force on the rooks on the d file and the b file. I think might be a strong idea. Bishop takes, and you're good, looking good. I think white didn't fully capitalize on his brief positional advantage. Bishop takes c4. Knight takes d4 was is a responsive attack that lets the discovery on the knight come through. So knight takes d4. I think knight takes e5 might even work, but you'll get a discovered attack on the knight on d4. Cool. Rook b3, a5, rook c1, and yeah. Now basically, with an insufficient dismantling of white's queenside pawns, there's a lot. Basically, black continues and has another relatively solid advantage. In terms of improvements here, bishop takes, Saul looks good. I think there's some inefficiency here. Maybe bishop to e7. But I think overall this should be good. I like black's general position here. Let's try to study and see exactly why the eval shifts. The eval shifts from -2 to -1. I guess in terms of response, I mean, this is all pretty quiet. I think bishop e7 is good. I think I like the general tactic. From a tactical perspective, I don't see much of a problem with this. I basically think that Rook H8 is a good plan. Rook takes, King takes. Black's basically holding this. Here, though, I wouldn't trade the rooks. You finally secured kind of a lasting positional advantage as Black. Your best route forward could potentially be Rook H1, could potentially be Rook H3. Yeah, there's a few different choices here. The engine is suggesting things along the lines of Rook H4, Bishop takes G5. But overall, I think it's I think this is a pretty good opportunity for Black to for Black to capitalize on his good penetration into the white situation. So yeah, I guess here I would say there's a positional disadvantage that comes with playing Rook takes D2. I'd probably play Rook H1, Rook H8, and make sure that you continue to maintain pieces within the white territory. Basically here, this doesn't really work super well for, this doesn't work out super well for Black, to be honest. I think basically Rook takes D2, and things are overly simplified. Yeah, and thanks very much, really, road to 3,000 for the follow. I'll get back to you. I'm pretty sure I know who you are, and I'll get back to you as soon as the stream is over. But thank you very much for the raid. But yeah, Rook H2 is an idea. But I think you want to leave the rook on the white territory here. So Rook H1, and then potentially Rook H8. You do have to be careful to not hang the C pawn, but I don't think trading off is correct. The engine suggests Rook H4. This is the most straightforward way to leave the rook in the king's, basically the white side territory, and then you can play Bishop takes G5 with the discovery on Rook to C4. That seems like a plan. This is a pre-made plan. This will hold everything as well as create a discovered threat on C4 here. Play Bishop takes G5, and you have the discovery on C4. But yeah, Rook takes D2 was played, so I think that offers an idea. I think the thematic understanding of keeping the rook on your opponent's territory is an important one. You've worked hard. You moved your king from King G8 to King G7. You moved your rook from Rook E8 to H8, and then you played Rook H1, Rook H2, and basically with this. You end up in a situation where Black is where Black is basically solid. No issues here, and but Rook takes D2 basically takes all that hard work that you've done, moving the king up, getting the rook into the white territory, and sort of trades it off for a rook that never spent any tempo on that. What about Bishop takes G5 in the line I mentioned? Yeah, no, I think that you're right. I mean, I think basically that's not playable for another few moves. The engine line, and when I look at it, I agree. I play Rook H4 is the best. But yeah, you do need to maintain defense on this. On the plus side, if he plays Rook D7, you can play Bishop F8. But you're absolutely right, King Me. You can't play Rook H8 immediately, or Rook H1, Rook H8 immediately. You have to wait for you have to continue to maintain the defense on this pawn on C5. But you're absolutely right. No, so thank you very much for letting me clarify that. In terms of continuing to play this game on, you get very quick advantages once the rook moves off of the C file. The C pawn you can maintain defense on, and overall this ends up being pretty good for Black. Rook B2, pawn takes, king over, and yeah, basically Black's solid. Black can sort of walk this in. Thank you very much, Arnav, and thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Hope this analysis is helpful. But yeah, good playing by Black here. In terms of looking at a good way of concluding this game. In terms of improving Black's situation, Knight C6 is an idea. Basically, I think you end up transposing it well, but I think that it does cause some problems, in terms of restricting the natural C5 break here. But it's fine. It's a developing move, so it's okay. And then more solidly, I think you've done a great job basically solidifying, your center. You got the pawn break that you needed and what you always need out of modern defenses against, solid, basically modern defenses against large center openings by white. But knight takes f3, and then pawn takes c4, and you're basically, you're basically in very good shape here. In terms of improvements, here b4, this all makes sense. But I think you really do improve by maintaining defenses on these pawns. They're very valuable. I would say queen to d5. I would say a5, and basically you hold on to all these pawns successfully. It's important, and you hold these pawns, successfully. Continue to expand on the queen side. Moves like knight a5, rook b8, potentially c6 or bishop d7. But basically, black's going to be in a pretty good place here. I don't know. Knight f6 is an idea. But yeah, queen d5 I would play. Yeah, queen d5 I like. Bishop takes c4, knight takes d4, and this was a good tactic. But I wouldn't have let the c4 pawn go for nothing. I would have played queen to d5, or I would have played knight to a5. But I don't think you can safely, I don't think it's worthwhile for you to just abandon the defense on these pieces. Queen d5 was the move, not bishop b7. All right, the game continues. Good tactic. And then I think, you're really only, the other thing that I would say is an inefficiency in this game is, you look how much effort you basically put, you do have a great plan, you do a great job, with making this effort to get your rook to h8 and getting your rook to h2. That was really a good plan. But you spend a lot of tempo to do it. So the rook is originally sitting on d8, and as black you play king g7, then you play bishop e7, then you play rook h8, then you play rook h2. So you've basically spent 4 moves to get the rook to h2, and then playing a 5th rook move to trade off for this rook that's basically only moved once is sort of an inefficiency. You spent a lot of tempo there that black has not spent. Here I guess I would say rook takes d2. I think is your second, your second error here. I would probably play rook to h8. I would also look at rook h1, rook h8, but you also need to be, aware of this defense. The engine comes up with this practical solution: rook h4 with bishop takes g5, rook takes c4. You're good as black, and overall I think this ends up playing out pretty well for black. Bishop takes and then kind of as an extension to this, after rook d7, bishop takes g5 wins a pawn. This is the best move for black here. So bishop f8 is definitely not as good as bishop takes g5. So yeah, I guess those are the two pieces. Maintain the defense on the c4 pawns. Don't be so quick to give up those those advanced c pawns in a position where the queen has really advanced. And then second, basically the second idea there is, be sure to, have a full tactical view. What I always recommend to everyone, is basically take a look at chess.com Puzzle Rush, chess.com Puzzle Battle, Lichess, Puzzle Storm, Chess Tempo, and CT-ART. Those are all excellent tactics trainers. I think the best way for any amateur player to move its way forward, like basically moving from, I'd say, about 1200 to 2000, the best way to do that is really to go from, tactics trainer, to move into tactics training and away from, away from standard methods. Like, a lot of people spend a lot of time on opening theory. I think that's great. And I think it will definitely help your complete understanding. But if you're looking for the most efficient way to improve as a chess player, as an amateur, someone who's not going to go pro, I guess my argument there would be, you really should heavily focus on tactics. An hour or two of tactics a day on any of the tactics trainers that I described will really help your game out. And I think that that's a good way to make sure that you succeed and advance in the most efficient way possible. That's what I'm saying. I think that will work, yeah, I highly recommend it. I think that's a good idea. So in this game, just to go over really quickly, finally, This b4 and then queen d5 is a tactical defense on c4. That was an improvement. And then first, don't trade off the rook out of principle. So you've spent a lot of moves getting that rook, rook to h2 to be there. Don't trade it off for a rook that's only moved once. And instead, with tactics training, I think a move like rook to h4 becomes more clear. This basically, forces something. It forces either this rook to go backwards, or it allows this bishop to take this g5 pawn, or it forces rook to c2. But the combination of those moves should be favorable to black, and this provides a better, this I think provides a better option to black out of, basically out of a somewhat rough situation, at least one where black has kind of a spatial disadvantage. After rook h4, I think black's showing pretty well. And bishop takes g5 provides the ability to get a pin on this f4 pawn with the rook behind it. That's the best tactical defense, and with sufficient tactical training, I think you would be able to see those moves relatively easily, and really be sure that you can kind of move things forward. But overall, very good game. Those are the two things that I would focus on, and yeah, thank you very much for sending it. Please send more. Please send them either via chat or via the official Discord. But yeah, thank you all very much for being here for sure. And thank you very much for sending this game. Thank you very much for sending this game, Kingmeat 1993. Really appreciate it. Please keep them coming. All right, so now we have Sam Sizwani's game. I basically, want to kind of take a look at the opening theory here. Sam Sizwani, I really appreciate sending the game. All this material is super helpful. And I guess one of the things that I'm sort of curious about here is, since I've been playing a lot of games out of the Scandinavian Queen d6 recently, for some reason I've been playing a lot of Bullet. So one of the things that I play in Bullet is Queen d6 Scandinavian. Here, I'm looking at ideas like, I'm basically, knight c3 threatens the queen. Okay, this is straightforward Scandinavian theory. Where does the queen go? Does the queen go to d6? Does the queen go to d8? Magnus played queen d8 in a tournament game, I think several years ago, but a fairly well-publicized one. And then just sort of played for advantage out of that, and I think probably won. Should probably find the game. It might be helpful to this theory. But queen e6 is further down the list. So the first thing about queen e6 is, I want to use this framework that that I'm thinking is pretty effective for, this framework that I think is pretty effective, which is look at two different things. If you're evaluating an opening move, look at the eval. So you have an eval, and this is just the standard chess.com engine. This is an eval of plus 0.8, and after you play queen e6, the eval shifts from plus 0.8 to about plus 1.28. So that's a change of about half a pawn. So with that change of half a pawn, and with this opening book in front of you, I think you can work on trying to get your basically your moves. You can try to basically use these two tools to perfect your opening repertoire. Queen e6 is an idea, but I think that it fails under this threshold. So the eval shifts against you, and it's way down the list in terms of playable moves. Queen e6 has 16 games, and there's about 20,000 games in there, so it's about a 1 in 1,000 chance. If you play queen d6, this is a much more standard mainline move. The evals aren't particularly favorable in any Scandinavian line. If you play pawn takes and you play queen d6, this is probably already going to be 0.1 plus point or plus 1 advantage, plus 0.9 advantage. Overall, I think basically this is this ends up being pretty good for white. Objectively, but you have a lot of practical compensation in this opening. But I would use those two methods to screen out something like queen e6 and instead play queen to d6. Queen to d6 I think is more promising. This I think is too many moves to be played in this opening. I don't think there's any efficiency gain in queen e6 and then f6. I don't know exactly, the logic in that I think is not extremely well defined. If you were going to do that, you probably should just play. So in this position, you probably should just play queen f5. Queen f5 is actually a move that occasionally gets played, as does I think queen, yeah, queen f5. But the main moves here are queen a5, queen d6, and queen d8. The combination of those three, I think, should offer black a pretty promising plan. In terms of other things here, so the queen e6, queen f6, I think is inefficient. There's not really that much value on queen on f6 anyways. So yeah, black's basically playing a kind of an unreasonable opening against you, and a beginner-like opening. He hasn't made any developing moves, and he's moved his queen around a good number of times. When this queen has moved around like this, I think the best response is just to develop in a normal fashion. Stay aware, make sure that there's no tactical errors, that will cause you to hang material. But basically, the thing with queen to d6, or the thing with queen to e6 and then queen to b6 and all these queen moves by black. I think basically, you're just not playing in a, black's not playing in an efficient way. White with straightforward development should be able to equalize, or be ahead. I'm guessing that in this analysis, white is already, reasonably far ahead. But yeah, white should just play straightforward developing moves, follow opening fundamentals, get all his pieces developed, castle, and set up a strong formation. And every move that black continues to move his queen around without an aim, I think white's going to have a bigger and bigger advantage by sticking to standard fundamentals, standard opening fundamentals. Knight c3, d4, castles, and now we're sort of getting into tactical play. Knight takes f7 isn't particularly good for white, or for black, sorry. And white ends up a ton of material. Yeah, this looks good. Black, has finally used his queen to get involved in something, reasonable on the board. Threats on h2. And queen takes f2 is an error because it's black missed the fact that queen or that f2 score was defended by the bishop, and basically tactical errors for black. So I think instead of focusing on the specific improvements, I think white played well. He developed in a straightforward way. This is exactly how things were supposed to go. I actually have very little. I have very little in terms of things to improve on white's side. I mean, white basically did the right things in this position. With the exception of knight b5, he moves new pieces and develops new pieces each turn. He doesn't make any tactical errors. Queen h5 probably would have simplified. I guess that I would say that's probably the main change that I would make here. Queen h5 and knight takes and rook takes, and you're already up enough material that you should be able to win this game. So I guess I would say simplify, when you're ahead, trade off pieces. That's one suggestion that I would make. Bishop takes a7 is also a little bit unresponsive to this threat on h2. But overall, really what I would focus on is the main point of this game. I'd focus on the concept as opposed to the specifics. I think specifically it comes down to a lot of tactical things. White didn't make many tactical errors and overall, won the game fairly easily. But I think the really important part is when regardless of what level you're at, if your opponent is playing queen moves or kind of anti-fundamental moves, if you play fundamentally and have the tactical backing to avoid any, basically, I don't know what you would call them, like tricks, you would basically be able to get a solid, a solid situation out of that. That would be my recommendation. Is basically if you if you basically hold things to, if you basically hold things together and play fundamental moves, you'll have an advantage against opponents who play in an anti-fundamental way. I don't know whether that'll turn out to be you'll secure better, a better attack with better development, or you'll, develop a, a better center because you've played for the center while your opponent was playing, very strange moves. It's not super clear in terms of, it's different and variable based on exactly what the opening is, what your advantages are. But the main point is, if your opponent is playing things that are illogical, if you play things that are logical, you will be in a good place going forward. That's my recommendation. Just stick with what makes sense. Stick with what you know to be the well-established and correct fundamentals, and have the tactical skill to back it up. If you have the tactical skill to back it up, that's really the most important part. That's basically necessary, I would say. You know, you can know all the fundamentals, but tactical training should be such a strong part of people's chess development that tactical training should be a strong part of people's chess development that you shouldn't struggle too hard falling into to avoid falling into cheap traps. That's my recommendation on that. So yeah, CTR, chess.com puzzle battles, chess.com puzzle rush. And I think overall that's going to provide a great way for you to improve. I think basically, this this manner of improvement, this just weightlifting style, tactical study is really what's going to provide the biggest advantage to players at the amateur level. I think a lot of people kind of lean towards teaching other material. I think having a well-rounded development is definitely good, but it's just a necessity. I mean, your tactical skill has to be reasonably good. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. I don't. It's happened many times in my life where basically my opponents have had excellent tactical understandings. My opponents have had excellent positional understandings, have excellent opening understandings, and then make tactical errors that lose the game. And that, I imagine, is very frustrating. And the way that you can avoid having that happen to you is basically by putting in the time on tactical study and making sure that you play in a precise way, which you will do if you put the time in on the tactical side. So overall, I think it's really interesting. I think it's really good. But the main point here, I think, is one that we can all kind of draw from, which is basically, if your opponent is playing, opening moves that involve moving the queen 6 times, you can really capitalize on that by playing fundamentally correct opening moves, developing all your pieces, and doing the same thing that you would do in a normal position, and then also not falling into any cheap traps. But with tactical study, you should be able to avoid that. Anyways, I think it's I think that's the insight from this game. Thank you very much, Sam Sejuani. Great win. I think you fundamentally did exactly the correct thing. Your opponent keeps moving the queen, and you have good restraint in not moving the queen, or basically not mirroring your opponent's anti-fundamental moves. And overall, I think really a great idea, great play. Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for for sending it. And if anyone else wants to send in games as well, please send in games. I mean, there's also the computer definitely does show some things that are kind of crazy. If there's a big piece sacrifices, that kind of thing. Playing no human at this point plays as tactically correctly as even very standard chess computers. So when you're doing tactical study, you're basically learning how to play more like a computer. Like the computer would be the best tactician in the world. That's one of the things that computers can do perfectly at this point. With that in mind, I guess I would say that you can't really teach good tactics. I mean, you basically have to study good tactics. There are resources that are probably more and less efficient than others, but it's just a necessity to have good tactical study and work that you have to just put in on your own. You can watch streams, and I think streams are helpful. I think, there's some great streams that will teach you how to improve efficiently. But at the end of the day, I think what you need to do is, basically, push forward on your own is a big part of your improvement, and an underrated one in my opinion. This is an early French exchange. So the French exchange is not a particularly popular line at this point. There was a time at which the French, the French advance. This is the French advance: e4, e6, d4, d5, e5. And the French advance at one point was a very popular opening. This was played in, I think, probably world champion matches, or certainly stuff at the very highest levels of chess. But eventually they've come to the idea that, okay, moving the pawn to e5 without a purpose of moving the pawn to e5 really becomes more of a liability and becomes a difficult pawn and a difficult pawn structure to hold for black. So it should really be played out of necessity. It does end up being played out of necessity very frequently in the French, but having this early, pawn structure, pawn structure with d4, e5 can be undermined fairly easily with c5. You respond with c3, knight c6, and it will transpose in many cases. But overall, having that early second pawn move, can provide a time advantage for black. It's not a particularly that's interesting, Tarash. Yeah, I'm very interested in taking a look at that. But yeah, the French advance is something that was once very popular and is now somewhat less popular. I think people have come to the consensus that either the mainline French or the Tarash French, which I know that Tarash is a fan of, leads to a solid and lasting, positional advantage for white, and overall is better than playing e5 here. In the mainline French, which we looked at the beginning of this lecture, by the way, like all lectures, is going to be available, for 14 days on Twitch and then forever on YouTube. If there's anything you missed or anything you'd like to revisit, this lecture, including the beginning of it, is going to be, recorded and put on Twitch, and it'll be there. It'll be there for a while. But yeah, knight to c3, I think, is the mainline French. It's pretty good. Here, does black play c5? Or no, so basically, I was looking at different lines, but here basically white plays the French advance, not as popular as it once was. Knight h6 seems early. I don't know, probably bishop takes h6 and giving black doubled isolated pawns is a good idea. The knights can be very strong in the French, maybe less so if this position's getting more open. But these pawns are such a liability for black that I think basically, black's going to be in, black's going to be in trouble if you enter an endgame. If white can get through all of the challenges that black will pose to him in the next 15 or 20 moves. But yeah, rook pawns are, doubled isolated rook pawns are often a huge liability for black. Going on in this game, what should white do to maximize here? He's played a bit of a sluggish opening. This advanced French is not particularly good. Mainline or Tarash is better. And then, one of the real fundamentals of playing the French, and I draw this from Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine, a book that you guys will hear me talk about a lot on this stream, is basically the value of one of the main determinants of how French games go for white and black is how well white can maintain this pawn structure on d4 and e5. d4 and e5, if they can be maintained by white, will provide white with a lasting advantage. If they get disrupted, or if one of them trades off, say pawn takes c5, this tends to be equal or better for black. This isn't literally true, but it's a very good general guideline in terms of learning about how to play the French. Black will have undermining moves like f6 and c5, and basically, we'll end up in a really pretty solid position here. So I would say here, bishop e3 probably is not as good as c3. c3 with the natural maintaining of this pawn structure is probably the way to play it. You can run into problems. I don't know. Pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, queen b6. I guess you play knight c3 probably. But overall, I think c3 provides a better defensive and more efficient defensive resource than bishop to e3. This I think is interesting. It's just an interesting idea. But c3 is the way that I would play this. Now with bishop c3 played, you would play bishop takes h6 and then c3. But yeah, this depletion of the center for white I think is not good. Basically white should have a solid center here, or at least an effort at a solid center. Now with both of these pawns gone, black is going to have center control pretty much for the rest of the game. I mean, he's basically going to have this e pawn and this d pawn available to attack white with in the center for the rest of the game, basically. So overall, I think that's pretty good. I think that's going to end up being pretty good for black against white, and I think there's improvements in white's play. starting with, I think, the French advance is questionable. The mainline French, I think, has pretty objectively been determined to be better at this point. Then c3. And then positionally, bishop takes h6, giving these doubled pawns is probably a good idea. It does open lines for black, but I'm sure it's worth it long run because those doubled rook pawns are such a liability. The center gets neutralized, bishop takes d7, and basically white's coming up with the best that he can do here. And now I think you can play knight takes d5. And this comes down to a relatively volatile tactical position, as many games do, at the end of the day. I mean, at club level, I would say half of games have, big swings. This, I guess what I would say about this is the main point is that you should overall, I guess at the end of the day, basically stick with reasonable openings and lean heavily on tactical study. This volatility here is too much. If you look at Grandmaster style games, what you notice is basically that you see a lot of you see basically flat lines here, and every kind of ridge on this analysis comes from a big difference in tactical theory. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Saurav. Really appreciate it. But yeah, these ups and downs here. This leads towards this basically leads towards a suggestion of having better tactical study. I mean, it's everyone's games look like this. I can pull up maybe since we have so many people here, I can pull up a game of mine versus an IM or something in 1 minute. And you'll see the volatility is still very high like this. But yeah, overall, you want to do the tactical study required so that you flatten this out. I'm going to show you guys some really ugly 1 minute games between masters. They're actually pretty impressive, but they will look this volatile. So in terms of thank you very much, Saurov. No, please, definitely. If you post games, they'll be up within a few days. Depending on how many other people, but. At the start of today, we had open slots. At the end of tomorrow, I'm guessing that at this point, your game will probably be on the 14th. But I really appreciate you joining the stream, and feel free to send as many ideas or games as you have, Saurov. My goal here is just really to provide free lessons, and if you just keep sending things. Really, very happy to have you contribute material for the stream. But yeah, so this ends up being very tactical. In order of things to think about in this game, I would say probably, consider whether the French advance is the correct opening for you. It may be, so, openings are a matter of style. But I would take a look at a few French mainline games as well. I think a takeaway from this is the value of doubled rook pawns is very low. So if you can give them voluntarily to your opponent, the odds are that's probably the right move. And then, just in general, I guess I would say focus a little bit more on maintaining this d4, e5 structure in the center. This Ruben Fine book, does an excellent illustration of various it's very drilled into my head. This does an excellent analysis of d4, e5 in the French, and basically different types of variations of this d4 e5 structure are laid out in a very good detail. It basically all points to the importance. c3 tends to be better than e3, and this is a big this is basically a big positional deal. Holding on to these pawns in the center, d4 e5 structure, that is just almost always good. Bishop takes, queen there, bishop takes. And overall, white's looking good. And that's the goal. I think that's a great point, Anch. Yeah, exactly, Tarash. Yeah, no. Sorry, I just saw that in the chat, guys. No, I think really steering things towards a fundamentally sound way of play. recommending the adequate tactical study. I think that's really the path forward. I mean, my goal is to provide good lessons. I think good lessons can be provided, so might as well give them. But on the topic of junk, I guess I've been playing a few more 1-minute games recently, and I just wanted to show you guys in terms of what games between masters can look like. These are 1-minute games that I played within the last day or two on my account. So I'm just going to pull up my, what my game looks like, and we'll take a look at the heartbeats on those games. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, S-Park. I would focus on the positional aspects and then tactical study as well, or the overarching concepts. But also, I would say jump on the opportunity to play bishop takes h6, because bishop takes h6 gives your opponent doubled isolated rook pawns, which are going to be difficult for him to deal with for the rest of the game. I wanted to show you guys my games versus grandmasters played over the last couple days. I've got them here, and I just want to pull them up. So let's take like one of these. They were basically 1-minute games. But between two titled players, I'm lucky enough that I actually get paired against GMs sometimes in the pool on chess.com. Let's take a look. One of the things that I like about my stream is that I really like to focus on my losses. I think grandmasters and many masters under-publicize their losses. So I'm going to try as hard as I can to only show games that I've lost on this stream, just to even things out a little bit. So let me find a good one. So this is an IM game, or sorry, this is an NM game. Or should we try an FM game? Let's look at this one. This is me versus an FM in 1 minute. We'll take a look. Yeah. So the first thing here is, what are our relative accuracies? The engine will come up with an analysis pretty soon, but I'm going to guess that they're surprisingly low. Okay, I played a 38.7%. My opponent played 93.6%. This is not atypical. We can send another, we can take a look at another one. I picked an extreme one. This is probably more inaccuracy by me. But we can look at more games that I've played and just show kind of what, what they tend to look like. So say here, live chess. I'll pull up one against a grandmaster instead. But basically, my point is, national masters, grandmasters are really just people. You basically can come up with, ideas that will trick people a lot. Here's a game against a grandmaster that I lost. But let's look at the accuracy on this one as well. And let's look at exactly what happened. Basically, White's playing aggressively. And the grandmaster on the other side is, basically playing at 92% strength. But it's 72 to 92.5, and the heartbeat is still there for sure. I mean, basically, there were advantages for black of 3.7 that got dissipated. There were advantages of 2.5 for white that got dissipated, and then there was an advantage for black of another 2.2 that got dissipated, and then black ended up winning. But basically, I think what's important to point out here is, kind of the structure of what this looks like. We both basically know the the games, right? We know this, we know this opening, but we make many errors, in these games. So, say knight to e3. I think this loses to bishop takes e3. Pawn takes e3, and then black will have good threats with... Black will play king h8, restores kingside. Yeah, no problem. No. I mean, I think the main point is, I think just focusing on, the errors that we all make is really what I'm trying to get at here. I'll play through this game, but this is literally a game of me versus a grandmaster yesterday that I lost, where the shifts are basically the grandmaster... I go up by 0.4, so there was a swing of 2 there. There's a swing of 2 there. and it goes from minus 3.7 to minus 0.77. And that, I think it's queen f7 opens up to queen g4, threats of so queen g1 to queen g4, and basically threats can be established on this d6 pawn. That's the value of this. Queen d4, queen d7, threats on d6, and basically white will be fine. What are how should one advance these types of positions? It's tricky, but it really comes down to tactical study. And the main point is there's volatility in every game. There's volatility in every game, including up to grandmaster level. I mean, this guy is a grandmaster, and there were swings of 4 points against him in this game. So I think in terms of that, I would say I really tells you to focus on tactical study. These volatilities are all either things that were played imprecisely by one side, or were played or were opportunities that were missed by the other side. Tactical study is extremely important. With perfect tactics, there would be no shifts of 3 points in this game. There's just a ton of back and forth. And, these types of opportunities are available to you against very high level players. I mean, this guy is an excellent world level player, I'm sure. I don't know who this is exactly. I just know his title on chess.com. But what I'm saying is, with tactical study, you really can optimize. That's why I think that it's important that you put the time in there. 92.5 gets beaten by 94. So if you can play a game that's 94% accurate, you will win. So that is the idea. There's things that I can help with and things that I can't help with. But what my main point of what I'm getting at here is do your time on tactical study. Chess.com provides 2 excellent resources. They're Puzzle Rush and Puzzle Battle. These are excellent. I could play through a puzzle battle or something if you guys are at all interested. But the main idea here is really just, strengthen your tactical play. I would recommend do it in a way that's free. I'm lucky enough that I have free membership on chess.com. But you can definitely find resources that are good. Chess.com or chesstempo.com is another one. But this stuff really is, this is effective. You can just basically play through and do it for hours and basically improve your game. You won't improve every single day, but you will always be moving in the correct direction if you allocate the right amount of time to tactics. That's how one goes from being 1200 to being 2000. It's not a purist way of going about things, but it is a very efficient way of going about things. You will have to circle back if you want to become a grandmaster. If you want to speed run to 3000, like Naroditsky has been nice enough to put together a full library on. I haven't seen it, to be honest, but I will. But if you'd like to move from a if you'd like to move from 1200 to 2000, the way you can do that is very tactically oriented. Your understanding can be excellent, and it's great to have a more well-rounded understanding. But in terms of getting the most efficient, improvement, tactical study, daily for an hour or two, will lead you there quicker than you think. That's my recommendation on that. I'll close out in a minute, but just for entertainment and to hopefully encourage you guys, I can do a puzzle battle. And just sort of show you what this looks like. So basically in puzzle battle, what you do is you basically have an opponent and you have 3 minutes. So with 3 minutes, you try to play as many tactics as you possibly can. Within an hour, since you generally get about 30 puzzles in 3 minutes, you can really see a lot of patterns very quickly. This, I think, is excellent for pattern recognition, and this is where I would point you towards, if you're a non-professional player looking to get the quickest rate of improvement. Basically you have an opponent. I like the way that it's sort of gamified here. I think that basically with, the full gamification here, you can, you can really stay focused. I mean, for me, it really helps to have kind of a rating system. Not that I'm super competitive about it, but what I would say is that With a full rating system, you're always focused because you always have the incentive to win. Not sure if I'm going to win this time, but I'll hopefully. So yeah, so this is where I would highly recommend you spend time. I think this really is an efficient way to go about things. Some of these are pretty tricky, being slow on this one, but yeah, this is a tool that one can use that I think provides a lot of value in your study. So let's see. Queen b7. Okay, sure. But yeah, the fact that it's competitive, keeps my focus up at least, because I hate seeing my rating go down. I hate feeling like I lost. But I think this pattern, these patterns, and this in this method of study will provide you with the quickest results at amateur level. They get complicated. I might have to slow down a little bit. But yeah, many good players on here. Very good tool. I really like this one. This one I'm trying to distract the knight from d6, and let's see. Okay. So yeah, these are interesting. They're all interesting, but the main point is that it's sort of cool to get to play it. But I think what it really is it shows you very quickly kind of a lot of patterns and a lot of pattern recognition. All right, I was lucky enough that basically I was able to win that one. But I think another thing that you can go through on this that's super helpful, and this is mostly just showing the functionality, is what you can do is you can go through and you can go to the puzzles that you got wrong, like this one, for example, and go back and study them to really just burn the tactical, the thinking into your head. It's a very good tool. I mean, I don't know if it's enough better that I would pay for chess.com over anything else, but it's very helpful and really what I would recommend. The thing that's so good about it, I think, is that yeah, no, totally. I mean, we could do chess tempo sometimes too. But the main thing is I'm very happy to do that, Aphelion. But I guess I would say with with Puzzle Battle is basically tactical study mostly is just pattern recognition. So what you do is you see a simple pattern, and Puzzle Battle kind of ramps up the tactics. They get harder and harder as you go up. So with the tactics on Puzzle Battle, basically you Puzzle Battle you have to rush for sure. But the thing that's good about it is that you basically start off with puzzles that are 500. They go to puzzles that are 600, and it goes up by 100 points or something every puzzle that you do. So when you do the hardest tactics, they're really just components drawn from lower level puzzles, and basically you can sort of work towards it. I can sort of go, maybe on slow tactics, I can go through and tell you the things that I'm looking at. Survival mode tactics is a different game than Puzzle Battle for sure, but they're both very good. Puzzle Battle is good, I think, because you get the most exposure to tactics at once. So in an hour you can go through and see 300 in an hour you can see 30 times 20, so 600 puzzles, if I'm right. Wait. Wait, am I doing the math right? 900, right? 30 times. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit spaced out. But the main point is you'll see a lot of different tactics. Yeah, sometimes. But the main point of this channel, Surov, is I really just want to give lessons. There are a lot of teachers out here. Yeah, but on Puzzle Battle you take about, I think, 6 seconds per puzzle. So in 3 minutes you do in 3 minutes you do about 30, and you have 20 sets of 3 minutes, so 600 puzzles an hour. 600 puzzles an hour is a lot. If you do that for 10 hours, then you've done 6,000 puzzles, and that's more than in that one book, right? So overall, you see, yeah, 600 in an hour shouldn't be a tough math problem, but I seem to be, yeah. But yeah, no. So, but yeah, 600 in an hour, and that means that if you do a week of an hour a day, then you've done 4,000 puzzles. I mean, that stuff really gets burned into your head that way. You really can do it well if you follow that route. It can really work and improve your level of play. So yeah, your math skills may go down, but your chess playing ability will hopefully improve. This I'm referring to myself. But yeah, I think what ends up happening is, you really just have really good. So yeah, so woodpecker method is interesting. One of the things that one of the books that I used at amateur level, and this again is a totally non-purist way to go about things, is there's a book called Rapid Chess Improvement. And it's a classic. It was written by a guy who was basically an amateur player. I mean, he wasn't a grandmaster. He wasn't a professional. It was written by a guy who very quickly went from 1200 to 2000, and it really was effective. The woodpecker method, if I remember correctly, is like you study puzzles, and if you get one wrong, you go back and look at it, sort of, right? You drill specific, and you do it sort of modularly, right? It's a good question, Anch. It's been a long time since I've looked at it, but this book is excellent. It recommends a really good classic way of. But anyways, oh, the woodpecker method. Interesting. I didn't know that this was its own book. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, in chess.com Puzzle Battle, they do have good repetition on the puzzles. I think basically, yeah, I mean, I don't know how to. But that is a very good book. In my training, that is very helpful way to go from 1200 to 2000. But now, we have a broader set of resources available. What I'm trying to do with this stream is have live chess lessons every single day. That's my goal. And I think that's going to become something that's more and more available. So if you have any particular things you'd like to look at, feel free to just post them on the post. Yeah, just post them on the post games board, and I'll go over them. I mean, it's really helpful for me. The only thing that I really can't help is the thing that I think is the most important, which is actually tactical play. At amateur level, I strongly believe tactical play is the best way to advance your game. But I can't. I can go through on survival mode, and I like Aphilion's idea for sure. I'm happy to go through and explain like a survival level tactics or whatever. But the thing that I'm kind of the thing that I'm most focused on is it's just one of those things where you have to go home and do spend that time on your own. I can help make your game more well-rounded. I can try to explain opening concepts. I can try to explain different types of positions or endgames. But the biggest thing in terms of improving is the work that you do on your own. I don't have anything more, insightful than that. But hopefully that is somewhat helpful. But these tools are great. I think basically, as time goes on, you're going to have better and better opportunities to improve your chess game. And hopefully resources are just going to be available to everybody to improve their chess. I think that's, really the main goal at the end of the day. But yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I like the idea. We'll do that. My channel's still in development. I've only been doing this for about a month or so, month and a week. And I really appreciate all you guys being here and being so supportive and being willing to spend time, learning with this stuff. But yeah, totally. No, I think you're making a good point, Aphelion, which is that I would like to make a more segmented theme or a more segmented stream. So basically, I could do something like beginner days on Mondays, or like have beginner lessons and tactics lessons and endgame lessons, and then intersperse that with with viewer games as well. But the main point is what I kind of want to close on and share my thoughts on, which is I really think chess lessons have the ability to be free. I really think that we have the technology now that we can have a live lesson with hundreds of people and provide that knowledge to everyone all at once. I think that that is something that modern technology allows us to do. And I think that's something that could really be helpful to people. I mean, we've gone through a period where with highly priced lessons, people from well-off economic backgrounds have really been at an advantage in terms of getting access to chess resources. I mean, it's in some sense how it works. I mean, if a grandmaster charges $100 an hour, not that many people are going to be able to pay that, unfortunately. So only people who are from a certain background will have easy access to lessons. My hope is basically that we can really level the playing field here. I think we can make it so that grandmasters give free streams. I think people will see the popularity of free lesson streams, and I think that's sort of the market will head in that direction. But the main goal of this is to make sure that everyone has equal access to education and to knowledge, because we can provide it. If we can provide it, we should provide it, because a system of inequity in which only rich kids can become grandmasters seems really like something that can be improved on. And for that reason, I'm very interested in this free lessons project. This makes me really happy to do, and I'm really happy that all you guys are here and that you participate in this stream, because I think that I really think this is something that could really level the playing field for everyone, and I think we're just seeing the very early starts of it. I think many YouTubers and streamers have done an excellent job in providing early level lesson material. But I think that live lessons where people can ask questions and have a basically tuition tailored to what they're interested in or what they may be struggling with is something that we can provide. And if we can provide it, we should, because that's what ethical that's what ethics dictate. The level field, the playing field can be leveled. So in this particular case, the cost of leveling it is relatively low. I really appreciate you guys being here. I really hope that we can continue. I think I plan to continue doing this, and I hope that others will as well. Yeah, I'm really happy that you guys are here and that you contribute so much to the stream. Thank you very much all for being here, and thank you very much for the raid, Road to 3,000. I'll reach out to you after the stream. Very nice thing for you to raid this stream and to bring some awareness to the project that we're embarking on here. But yeah, thank you all very much for your help. And this is just the beginning. Way better players than me will start to do this. I'm fairly confident, and that will help the world. I think there's many better players than me. Better players than me will walk into this field and do a great job explaining things at an even higher level. But I'm happy that I can do a little bit to work and move things in this direction. Anyways, no, I wouldn't say that. There's anyways, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you being here, and I think this is just the beginning. A lot of other people will move in this direction, and that makes me happy because we'll end up in a better world that way. Anyways, thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you being here. Next stream is at 6:05 p.m. Eastern, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Bye.